around the world.
The negotiations ran into extra time and saw the COP27 presidency and parties locked in detailed discussions round the clock. Long days and nights, strained and sometimes tense, but they were working towards achieving one goal, an implementation work program that will contribute to keeping global temperature of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive.
We have struggled for 30 years on this path, and today in Sharm el-Sheikh, this journey has achieved its first positive milestone.
But we also wanted to take definitive steps forward. We joined with many parties to propose a number of measures that would have contributed to this. The pulse of 1.5 degrees was weak. Unfortunately, it remains on life support.
It's a difficult journey because of the various anthropogenic activities that tend to shoot these temperatures above 1.5. But with the collective efforts of everyone in the world, including the ones that we are making in Nigeria on this HYPRED project, we know that collectively together we can keep it just within that range.
The issue of loss and damage was for the first time central to the agenda at COP. It was one of the key demands of developing countries to help them adapt to the devastating impact of climate change, for which they bear less blame. At first, it seemed elusive, but was finally established at the end of negotiations.
We've been negotiating today and during the week to try to make sure that our representatives manage to get local governments, local councils into the agreement. Because if we're not in the agreement, we will not be on the receiving end of the finance either.
Marginalized communities, especially those related to indigenous, black people, to be heard and to be invited for the conversations, because they are the ones most impacted when we think about the climate crisis we are facing.
Financial pledges were made for loss and damage from multiple countries, including Austria, Belgium, Canada, France, Germany, and New Zealand, joining Denmark and Scotland, which had made pledges previously. Speaking about the historic decision, COP27 President Sameh Shoukry said, "We heard the calls and we responded. Today, here in Sharm el-Sheikh, we established the first ever dedicated fund for loss and damage, a fund that has been so long in the making. It was only appropriate that this COP, the implementation COP in Africa, is where the fund is finally established." End of quote.
We're also looking at issues to do with how best developed countries can secure or ensure that technology, research, as well as skill transfer is being passed on to African scientists as well as African governments.
The issue of loss and damage, which is very, very central when we are talking about justice for frontline communities, people from the global south like we are. We want to think that this COP has continued the tradition of circles.
Other commitments made towards the implementation of climate action during COP27 include the United States announcing it will contribute $150 million as a down payment to initiatives to help Africa adapt to the changing climate, as well as announcement by a coalition of leading climate philanthropists to invest $500 million over the next 3 years to accelerate a just and equitable energy transition in low and middle-income countries.
My administration has also made the United States the first ever contributor to the Adaptation Fund last year, and this year we're doubling our pledge to bringing our total commitment to $100 million. We're also making sure that every dollar we deliver goes as far as possible, unlocking larger pools of finance and the trillions in private investment we know that will be needed.
While climate change activists have expressed joy at this breakthrough, they are worried that action is yet to be taken on previous promises, including $100 billion pledged by the world's top emitters to help poorer countries cope with the impact of climate change.
What is happening is that what leaders are still promising us from the global north. And for me, I don't think it's a cup of implementation, it's a cup of talk.
They also frowned at the heavy presence of fossil fuel industry delegates, considered to be big polluters at COP, a move capable of whittling down negotiations.
It's neither here nor there, because the big emitters are also those who have the financial muscles to bring about some kind of change.
The activists want those responsible for climate change to see Loss and Damage Fund as taking responsibility for their climate-induced crisis and not as a charity to developing nations.
We're not begging. We are only saying that the global north owes ecological debts and that they should pay now.
Though the decisions at COP27 may not be satisfactory to all parties and groups, the work done in the 2 weeks of negotiations and the results achieved, according to COP President, are testaments to collective will as a community of nations that multilateral diplomacy still works.
What we need is more trust, more empathy, and more understanding. Our world deserves this. This process deserves this.
We've determined a way forward on a decade-long conversation on funding for loss and damage. Communities whose lives and livelihoods have been ruined by the very worst impacts of climate change. So at COP27, we've established the fund that will provide one pillar of the response required to ensure loss and damage is addressed.
It's been 2 weeks of long negotiations and long hours of deliberation by parties to the UN climate change agreement. And of course, the outcome is being interrogated in this room at the last day of COP27, with so many parties and groups expressing mixed feelings to the outcome. Parties left Sharm el-Sheikh with renewed hope in the future of the planet and more determination to achieve the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. Nkoli Omodu, AIT News, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.